I guess this is the moment when I lay everything bare, no embellishments, no holding back. I discovered that my wife, Mia, had been unfaithful to me with several different men. This wasn't one of those gradual realizations where you piece together small clues over time. No, it hit me like a freight train. At first, I couldn't even grasp the extent of her betrayal. But believe me when I say it cuts deeper than you can fathom. You think you know someone, right? You build a life together, share everything, and then boom, it all shatters. Let me rewind for a moment. I met Mia back in our college days. She was everything to me back then. Hilarious, intelligent, ambitious. Her smile had a magnetic pull, making it impossible not to get lost in it. We were at some party, those wild nights when everyone's trying to drink away their student loans, and she just stood out from the crowd. I remember thinking she was the one for me. We hit it off instantly. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, as if we'd known each other forever. We talked about our dreams, our future, everything we wanted out of life. It was one of those perfect moments that stick with you, you know? The kind you never forget. Fast forward a few years, and we tied the knot. It was a modest ceremony, nothing too flashy. I didn't care much for the wedding extravaganza, and neither did she. At least, that's what I thought. Life was good for a while, but I can't pinpoint when things started to change. Looking back, though, the signs were definitely there. They say hindsight is 20/20ths, right? It began subtly, late nights at work, more girls' nights out. And suddenly, she had a whole new group of friends I'd never met before. The first few instances didn't raise any alarms for me. She was driven, and her job as a project manager kept her on her toes. But then, she started coming home inebriated more frequently, which was unusual since Mia had never been much of a drinker, at least not before. I'd ask her about it, and she'd brush it off, claiming it was work stress or just one of those nights. Initially, I wanted to trust her. I really did. But when you're lying in bed, night after night, waiting for someone who used to be eager to return home, only to have her stumble in at 2 or 3 in the morning reeking of alcohol and who knows what else, you start to question everything. You begin to snoop. What else can you do when your instincts scream that something is off, yet she insists it's all in your head? I'd catch her texting late at night, laughing at messages, and quickly hiding her phone when I entered the room. She'd tell me it was just the girls, but it didn't feel right. There was a persistent, nagging sensation in the back of my mind, the kind that keeps you awake, wondering what the hell is happening when the person you thought you knew inside and out starts to feel like a stranger. One night, she passed out after yet another girls' night. This time, I couldn't hold back anymore. I'm not proud of it, but I grabbed her phone. She'd always kept it off limits, claiming it was for work stuff or confidential projects. But I cracked her passcode weeks prior. I just hadn't mustered the courage to check it until that moment. And yes, I knew I was crossing a line, but at that point I was desperate for answers. I unlocked it, my hands trembling uncontrollably. At first, it was just texts, harmless at first glance. A bunch of group messages with her friends, some work-related chatter. But then I noticed a name I didn't recognize, Ben, followed closely by Ryan. Okay, I thought maybe they're just co-workers. But as I kept scrolling, my heart plummeted. Photos, videos. I'll never forget that feeling. It was as if my chest was caving in as I scrolled through them. There wasn't just one guy. There were multiple. Multiple. And these weren't just flirtatious messages or innocent selfies. They were full-blown videos of her at some kind of party, a party I certainly wasn't invited to. Group sex parties. Men I didn't recognize, doing things with my wife that I never imagined she'd be into. I thought I knew her. How wrong I was. Each new image felt like a fresh stab in the gut. And by the time I put the phone down, I was shaking so violently that I thought I might throw up. I glanced over at her, passed out as if nothing was amiss, while my entire world crumbled around me. I didn't wake her. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell had happened to my life. How did we end up here? Was it my fault? Had I pushed her into this? Was I so oblivious that I failed to see it coming? Or had she always been like this? And I just blinded myself to it because I wanted to believe in the fantasy we'd created together? The thing is, once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. It alters everything. And the anger? It starts as a slow simmer in your chest. But before long, it's all-consuming. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to shatter everything in my path. But I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't prepared for the storm that was about to unfold. Instead, I spent the remainder of that night contemplating my next move. People often say that revenge isn't worth it, that it won't bring any satisfaction in the end. But honestly, they couldn't be more wrong. After uncovering Mia's betrayals, the only thing keeping my sanity intact was the thought of making her pay. This needed to be deeply personal. Merely leaving her or exposing her wouldn't suffice. No, I craved to inflict that same gut-wrenching pain, the kind that twists your insides when you realize everything you believed was a lie. That's when the thought of Lisa popped into my head, Mia's mother. Let's just say she had aged remarkably well. Even though she was still married to Mia's dad, their relationship had been teetering on the edge for quite some time. Mia had casually mentioned that they were more or less going through the motions, lacking any real love. Perfect. I decided to take things slow, keeping my approach subtle. Rushing wouldn't serve me well. I knew I had to play the long game. After all, Lisa wasn't naive. She had navigated her own challenges in life, so I had to be careful not to alarm her. I began presenting myself as the caring son-in-law. Maintaining appearances was crucial while I set my plan in motion. We met for family dinners, just casual get-togethers. I'd offer to help her around the house or suggest grabbing coffee, sharing stories about our mutual struggles. And of course, I perfected the role of the heartbroken husband. I'd drop hints about my troubles with Mia, expressing my confusion over why our marriage felt so distant. Lisa, with her nurturing instincts, lapped it all up. She started confiding in me about her own frustrations with Mia's dad, sharing feelings of loneliness and being unappreciated. It was almost too easy. The more she opened up, the closer our bond grew. Then came the perfect opportunity. One evening, I proposed we have dinner, just the two of us. Nothing suspicious about that, right? After all, she had been my confidant for months, and I was so grateful for her support. We chose a nice, quiet restaurant, and I could see the flattery on her face. I played it cool, keeping the conversation light until the wine began to flow. That's when the mood shifted. She opened up about her marital issues, expressing how trapped she felt, how much she missed being desired. That was my opening. I leaned in, and I'll never forget the look in her eyes when I brushed her hand ever so lightly. She didn't flinch. In fact, she leaned in closer. Everything was falling perfectly into place. After another bottle of wine, I suggested we head back to her place, keeping my tone casual as if it were just another night. Inside, however, I was a mix of anger and thrill. This was it. Once we arrived at her home, things escalated quickly. A few more drinks and some lingering touches led us to the couch, kissing like a couple of teenagers. It wasn't a romantic moment. It was raw and fueled by years of frustration on her part and my need for revenge. I felt a twisted satisfaction with every touch. Each movement was a step in my plan. I couldn't say if Lisa fully understood what she was getting into. Maybe she did, or maybe she craved it just as much. Regardless, that night I got exactly what I wanted. We ended up in her bed, and let's just say that revenge can feel pretty damn gratifying when you're fueled by anger. The next morning, Lisa acted like we were harboring some huge secret, guilt weighing heavily on her. She kept insisting that no one can ever know and that it shouldn't have happened. But I didn't care about her guilt or her feelings. To me, this was merely the first step in my grand plan. A few days later, it was time to unleash the bombshell on Mia. I had no intention of being subtle. I wanted her to feel every ounce of what had transpired. I waited until we were seated at the kitchen table one ordinary evening after work. She was glued to her phone, likely texting one of her many friends from those pathetic parties she frequented. I had to suppress the urge to hurl her phone across the room. Instead, I leaned back and calmly stated, "I slept with your mother." You know that moment when someone's world shatters? I witnessed it right in front of me. Mia froze, her eyes wide as she struggled to process my words. She stammered, desperately trying to respond, but all that emerged was, "What? That's not. You're lying." I couldn't help but smile. "Oh, I'm not." We had dinner, shared a few drinks, and then, well, you know how these things go. I could see her anger bubbling beneath the surface. She wanted to lash out, scream, but she was too stunned to react. So I twisted the knife deeper. "If you want the details, I'm more than happy to share." She jumped up from the table, her face flushed with rage. "You're disgusting," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "How could you do that? My mother? You're sick." I stood leaning over the table. "Am I?" I shot back. "What about you, Mia? How many guys have you been with behind my back? You think I don't know? Group sex parties? Who's the sick one here?" The atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly quiet, shattered only by her labored breathing. I could see the moment it hit her. She realized I was dead serious. There was no room for doubt. I wasn't bluffing. For the first time, I saw genuine fear reflected in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something but faltered, unable to find her words. I didn't give her the opportunity to gather herself. "Yeah, Mia, I know everything. Every disgusting detail. And guess what? Your mother? She's better than you." That was the breaking point. She exploded, hurling her phone at me and unleashing a torrent of insults. I stood there, completely unfazed. She was spiraling out of control, and in that moment, I felt more in charge than I ever had. This was the revenge I craved. I wanted her to experience the same humiliation and betrayal she had inflicted on me. As she stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. It was wrong, sure, but after all she'd put me through, it felt justified. Once the dust settled after revealing my knowledge about Lisa, I knew my next step was clear: divorce. There was no question about it. I couldn't remain married to someone like Mia, not after witnessing her betrayal. Our marriage had been a facade for far too long, and it was time to dismantle it. But I wasn't going to exit quietly. No, I had hard evidence, solid, irrefutable proof, and I planned to use every bit of it to ensure she'd never forget what she did to me. The first step was finding a lawyer. I wasn't messing around. I needed someone cutthroat, someone who would go for the jugular. I found just the guy, Harris, a shark of a divorce attorney. He didn't waste time with unnecessary questions. He just wanted to see the evidence I'd gathered. I handed over the videos, the photos, everything from her phone. I'll never forget the look on his face when he opened the files. It was like he couldn't believe his eyes. "Well," he said after a long pause, "I think we've got more than enough to bury her." And that's exactly what we did. Filing for divorce wasn't the thrill I expected, but it was a crucial step. I needed to extricate myself from this mess and take as much with me as I could. We began compiling everything. Every video, every text, every receipt that showed Mia's double life. I wasn't just after revenge. I was aiming for total destruction. I wanted her to face humiliation, to lose everything she thought she could rely on. When the court proceedings began, it felt like stepping into a gladiator arena. Mia walked in, looking like a ghost, clearly sleep-deprived, probably aware of the storm that was about to hit. But I couldn't care less. She had brought this upon herself. She had the audacity to act innocent, as if she hadn't been caught red-handed sleeping with multiple men behind my back. She sat there with her sleazy lawyer, trying to paint her as the victim, claiming she'd made mistakes and that our marriage had naturally deteriorated. Yeah, no kidding. But those weren't mistakes. Those were conscious choices she made repeatedly. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every time her lawyer tried to spin some sob story about how we'd grown apart, I focused on the judge's expression. He wasn't buying it, not with the evidence we had. When it was my turn to present, I made sure the videos were played for everyone to see. I wanted them to witness the real Mia, not the innocent facade she was trying to maintain. And let me tell you, it was a spectacle. Mia sat there, looking ghostly pale as the videos rolled. The sounds, the images, there was no denying her actions. The horror on her face, as everyone watched, was priceless. Her lawyer kept objecting, claiming it was too personal or irrelevant. But the judge let it all unfold, minute by minute. By the time it ended, Mia looked like she might vomit. She understood there was no escape from this reality. I testified too. I laid it all bare. The late nights, the lies, the hidden phone, the group sex parties. I recounted how I found out, confronted her, and how she had the gall to deny it at first. Throughout it all, Mia just stared at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. The court battle dragged on longer than I anticipated, with her lawyer resorting to every trick to paint her as the victim. But the evidence was overwhelming. Ultimately, the judge ruled in my favor. I walked away with the house, most of our assets, and a clean break from the woman who had shattered my life. It was a victory, but it didn't feel as gratifying as I'd imagined. Maybe it was because I knew there was still more I could do. That's when I decided to escalate things further. You see, just getting a court ruling wasn't enough for me. I wanted everyone to know who Mia really was. I wanted her life to unravel the way mine had. So, after the ruling, I took those videos from her phone and uploaded them to an anonymous website. Don't ask me which one. You wouldn't believe it if I told you. It was one of those shady sites where people share all sorts of messed up stuff. And within hours, the videos began spreading like wildfire. I leaned back and observed everything unfold. I watched the numbers rise, the comments flood in, and an odd sense of satisfaction washed over me. Mia was blissfully unaware of the storm heading her way. She had no clue that her sordid secret was now public knowledge. And that's precisely what I wanted. I wanted her to feel the humiliation, the shame, the complete loss of control. It didn't take long for the word to spread. I caught whispers from mutual friends and noticed the online chatter. People were definitely talking. Mia was quickly becoming infamous, and there was nothing she could do to reverse it. Even her workplace found out. Apparently, being a project manager while starring in group sex videos doesn't exactly blend well. After that, I didn't need to lift a finger. Her life began to unravel all on its own. People started pulling away from her. She lost her job, and eventually, even those new friends from her parties wanted nothing to do with her. And you know what? I didn't feel an ounce of remorse. Not even a smidgen. She brought it all upon herself. That night, as I witnessed the fallout, I slept more soundly than I had in months. There was something strangely calming about knowing she was finally facing the consequences. I didn't care if that made me a bad person. I had stopped caring about a lot of things by then. All that mattered to me was ensuring she paid for her actions. And she did. Completely. After everything, the court battles, the videos, the aftermath, I realized I needed to get my act together. You can only stay in revenge mode for so long before it starts consuming you. So, I made a decision. It was time to rebuild my life and focus on myself. No more dwelling on Mia or the past. I wanted to move on, even if I wasn't entirely sure how to achieve that. The first thing I did was start exercising. I had never been a gym person, but I needed a way to channel my anger and frustration. Every morning, I'd hit the gym, running on that treadmill as if I were trying to escape my own thoughts. Initially, it was just about getting through the day without feeling like I might explode, but gradually, it evolved into something more. I began to enjoy it. I challenged myself, lifted weights, and ran longer distances. And you know what? It worked. Physically, I felt stronger, more in control, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Then I started doing things I hadn't enjoyed in years. exploring new places and revisiting old hobbies that had faded during my marriage. I had always loved photography, but somehow I had stopped taking pictures. Mia didn't share that interest, so it just fell by the wayside. But now, with all the time in the world, I dusted off my old camera and embarked on weekend trips. Sometimes I drive without a destination, stopping wherever caught my eye, capturing landscapes, people, and spontaneous moments. It felt like rediscovering a part of myself I had long forgotten. However, no matter how much I filled my days with new experiences, the past still haunted me. At night, when everything was quiet, my thoughts would drift back to Mia. I'd replay the good times, those memories of when we were genuinely happy. It wasn't all terrible, you know? We shared real moments that made me believe we had it all. And that's the hardest part. It's not like everything was a disaster from the beginning. There was a time when I loved her, when I believed she was my forever. But all of that was overshadowed by her betrayal and the lies. I'd lie awake, contemplating how things might have turned out differently. What if I'd noticed the signs sooner? What if I had been a better husband? But those thoughts are toxic. You can't alter the past, no matter how many times you replay it in your mind. It's like standing in front of a wrecked car, wondering what might have happened if you had taken a different route. The crash still occurred. You just have to manage the aftermath. One day at work, I met Ava. She was new to the office, fresh from a marketing firm in another city. We struck up a conversation, initially about work, but then we discovered common interests. She was into photography as well, and we shared stories about our travels and favorite shots. There was something easy about our conversations, something that felt safe. Yet, despite my attraction to her, a wall remained intact within me. I couldn't let her in completely. I had been burned too deeply, and the thought of opening up to someone again terrified me. Each time I considered letting my guard down, that little voice in my head would remind me of what happened with Mia, warning me that trust is fragile and once broken, nearly impossible to rebuild. Ava was patient, though. She didn't pressure me. We'd sometimes grab drinks after work, chatting about everything and nothing at all. Gradually, I felt myself relaxing around her. I could be myself without the burden of my past weighing me down. She wasn't like Mia, or at least I hoped she wasn't. But still, that fear kept me from fully embracing the connection. Throughout all this, Chris, my best friend, was my constant. We had weathered storms together, and after everything with Mia, he was there for me in ways I didn't even realize I needed. He called me on weekends, dragging me out of the house even when I didn't feel like it. He pushed me to try new things, meet new people, and stop wallowing in my past. I owe him a lot. If it hadn't been for Chris, I likely would have drowned in bitterness and regret. One evening, after a few too many drinks, Chris sat me down for a tough love talk that I hadn't wanted but desperately needed. We were at a dive bar, engrossed in a game, when he turned to me and said, "Dude, it's time to stop living in the past. Mia's gone. It's over. You need to start thinking about what comes next." At first, I shrugged it off, but Chris wasn't backing down. "I'm serious, Sam. You're a good guy. You deserve better than letting that bitch ruin your life. You need to move on, man. Meet someone new. Live your life." For the first time in ages, his words actually sank in. He was right. I couldn't keep letting Mia's betrayal dictate my life. Sure, it had happened. Sure, it hurt like hell. But I was still here. I was still standing. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start looking ahead instead of behind. After that, Ava and I began spending more time together. It started off as nothing serious, just friends chatting. Yet I could feel a connection growing between us bit by bit. She had this incredible ability to make me forget everything else, even if only for a moment. I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious just yet, but for the first time since the nightmare with Mia, I felt like maybe I could. Still, the fear lingered. Trusting someone again felt like an insurmountable challenge. But with Ava, there was no pressure. She allowed me to take my time, never pushing me or expecting more than I was prepared to give. That was a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long while. Rebuilding trust has proven to be harder than I'd anticipated. After everything with Mia, there seemed to be an invisible wall that I couldn't break through. Yet with Ava, something felt different. Her patience reassured me. I didn't feel the need to rush. We began to open up to each other, discussing the real stuff. Our pasts, our mistakes, the events that had shaped us. It wasn't easy for me to delve into those buried aspects of my life. But with her, it didn't seem so overwhelming. Maybe it was because she never judged or pressured me to become someone I wasn't. One evening, after work, we found ourselves in a quiet corner of a cafe. I hadn't intended to share so much, but it all came pouring out. The betrayal, the court battles, the videos, everything. I expected her to react, maybe look at me differently after hearing about the chaos I had endured. Instead, she listened, nodding occasionally, giving me the space to express it all. When I finally finished, all she said was, "That must have been hell for you." Her response took me by surprise. There was no pity, no lectures, just understanding. It felt like a weight I didn't know I was carrying had lifted. For the first time in ages, I felt like I wasn't defined by what Mia had done. Perhaps there was more to me than just the guy who got cheated on. Ava and I continued to grow closer after that. It wasn't some fairy tale romance, not even close. We took our time, sometimes painfully slow. There were days when I would withdraw, when memories of Mia would crash over me like a tidal wave, dragging me under. Those moments would remind me of the good times, the times I thought everything was perfect. It was like trying to scrub a stain that wouldn't budge. No matter how hard I focused on the present, the past kept sneaking in, reminding me of my losses and the person I used to be before everything fell apart. One night, lying in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, sifting through old memories like I had countless times before. The reel was always the same. Mia's laughter, the way she used to look at me, the plans we had. Then came the sharp turn, the betrayal, the lies, and the inevitable downfall. I despised that those memories still held power over me. I hated that she continued to occupy space in my mind after everything. It made me wonder if I would ever truly be free of it all, if I could genuinely move on without dragging that baggage into my future. Ava picked up on it too. She could sense when I began to pull away, when the ghosts of my past took over. "You don't have to face this alone," she told me one night after I had been distant for a few days. "Whatever you're feeling is okay. Just don't shut me out." Her words struck me harder than I anticipated. It wasn't that I didn't want to let her in. I genuinely did. But allowing her in meant confronting parts of myself I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The anger, the hurt, the fear that maybe I wasn't capable of being in a relationship anymore. That maybe, deep down, I was just as broken as Mia had left me. But I didn't want to be that guy anymore. I didn't want to remain stuck in the past, endlessly replaying the worst parts of my life like some form of punishment. I knew that if I continued to live that way, I would never find any real peace. I'd just keep circling back to the same mistakes, the same doubts, and the same pain. So, I made a decision. I chose to confront it all, to tackle the mess I had been avoiding. I started seeing a therapist, something I had always believed was for other people, not for me. But I needed it. I needed someone to help me untangle the chaos in my head, to find clarity in the confusion. And slowly, session by session, I began to understand what had been holding me back. It wasn't just Mia's betrayal that had messed me up. It was the way I had lost trust in myself. I had ignored the signs with Mia, dismissed my own instincts because I didn't want to face the truth. I didn't want to believe that the person I loved could do something so cruel. And now, with Ava, I was terrified of making the same mistake. Terrified of trusting someone again, only to end up in the same place, broken and bitter. But through therapy, I started to see things differently. I realized that trusting someone doesn't mean ignoring the risks. It means understanding that, yeah, things might go wrong, but that doesn't mean they will. It's about taking that leap even when you're scared. And more than that, it's about trusting myself. Trusting that I've learned from the past, that I won't ignore the signs again. It wasn't easy. Hell, it still isn't. There are days when I catch myself slipping, when those old fears come creeping back, whispering that maybe I'm not cut out for this, that maybe I'm destined to screw things up. But now, I know how to push through it. I know that those voices don't control me. I do. Ava and I had a long conversation one night, after I'd been feeling particularly off. I told her everything, how scared I was, how I didn't know if I could ever fully trust again. She didn't get upset or frustrated. She just listened the way she always does. And when I was done, she said something that stuck with me. We can figure this out together. It doesn't have to be perfect right away. We'll figure it out one step at a time. That's when I knew. I knew I wanted to try. I wanted to open my heart again, even if it scared me. Because at the end of the day, what's the alternative? Living in fear, in bitterness? I'd done that long enough, and it nearly destroyed me. It wasn't just about Ava, though. It was about me. I had to come to terms with my past, accept it for what it was, and let it go. I wasn't going to let Mia's actions define me anymore. I wasn't going to keep carrying that weight around like a badge of honor. I started making plans. Small ones at first, weekend trips with Ava, talking about where we saw ourselves in a few years, what we wanted out of life. But it was more than that. It was the beginning of something new, a future that wasn't dictated by my past, but shaped by what I wanted, by who I wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that eventually there's nowhere to go but up. And after everything, Mia's betrayal, the divorce, the anger, the bitterness, I realized I'd finally reached that point where I was ready to climb back up. But this time, I wasn't doing it alone. I had Ava, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually see a future. A real one. It wasn't some epiphany that hit me all at once. It was gradual, like waking up from a long, dark sleep. One day, I just knew I was ready to move on, to stop letting the past define me. I was ready to start something new with her. Ava wasn't just someone who helped me through the tough times. She'd become someone I wanted to build a life with. And that's a hell of a realization after everything I'd been through. We started talking more seriously about our future, laying it all out on the table. It wasn't easy at first, given all my hang-ups, but the more we talked, the more I realized we were on the same page. We both wanted the same things: stability, trust, happiness. But we didn't just talk about the abstract stuff. We got specific. Where we wanted to live, how we saw ourselves growing, what we wanted from each other. It was refreshing having someone who was just as invested in building a future as I was. One night, after a long conversation about our dreams and goals, I made the final decision. I was ready to commit, not just to Ava, but to the idea that I could be happy again, that I could have a life filled with hope instead of resentment. I told her as much, and the relief on her face was all I needed to know I was making the right choice. We were in this together now, and it felt damn good. I wanted to mark this new beginning in some way, something symbolic to officially close the chapter on my past. So I decided to organize a small dinner. Nothing fancy, just a gathering of close friends, a few people who had been there for me through it all. Chris, of course, was the first one I invited. Without him, I'm not sure I'd have made it this far. I owed him that much. At that dinner, I felt lighter than I had in years. We toasted to new beginnings, to letting go of the past, and to the future. For the first time, I wasn't just going through the motions. I actually believed it. I believed that I could leave everything that had happened with Mia behind and start fresh, with a clear mind and a full heart. It was cathartic in a way. Saying goodbye to that part of my life wasn't easy, but it was necessary. After the dinner, Ava and I went for a walk. It had become our thing, walking through the park, just talking, no distractions. That night it felt different. It felt final, like I was truly stepping into something new. We walked side by side, reminiscing about how we met, how far we'd come since then. I told her how much she meant to me, how she had helped me in ways she probably didn't even realize. And for the first time, I felt like I could actually breathe, like the weight of the past had finally lifted. As we walked, I looked over at her, and I knew this was it. This was the life I wanted, the person I wanted to be with. I wasn't holding on to the anger or the pain anymore. I wasn't letting the ghost of Mia haunt me. I'd finally found peace. At some point during the walk, Ava took my hand, and we just kept going. No words, no need for them. We both knew what this moment meant. It was a quiet, simple kind of happiness, the kind I didn't think I'd ever have again. But here I was, walking through the park with the woman I cared about, looking forward instead of back. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful. I was ready to move forward, to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I wasn't alone. It was a new beginning, and for the first time in years, I could honestly say I was excited about the future.